Hi everybody, Dr. Ahles here. In this short video, we're going to talk about what's called the refractory period on a neuron. This is a period of time where a neuron is not able to receive other messages, or at least not easily. When we look at the action potential graph that we've been exploring before, remember that the way that a neuron is able to send messages to its neighbor comes from the fact that it changes its membrane's charge. When I talk about this thing called the refractory period, really what it comes down to is the fact that when I am depolarized, when my membrane charge is high, because I've already received a message, I can't then receive another message. I can't raise my membrane charge when it's already raised. This is the refractory period. So the period of time when the membrane on my neuron is depolarized, when it's too hard, too high, is the refractory period. There are two kinds of refractory periods on our neuron. The first kind of refractory period is called the absolute refractory period. And once you've written in that word absolute, I want you to underline, highlight, star that no new action potentials can be generated. I don't care how loud your message is, I can't hear it because I'm in the absolute refractory period. Absolutely no messages can be heard. There is also a period called the relative refractory period. In the relative refractory period, I can hear some messages, but let's underline, highlight, star that those messages have to be very strong. So you need to send a lot of messages. They need to be lots of neurotransmitters. If I get enough messages in the relative refractory period, I can respond. Let's talk about what causes these different refractory periods. So here's the graph that we've seen before, color-coded a little bit differently, has a little bit different information on it, but it's going to help us explore the refractory period. We start here at the beginning. Here in the purple region, we're at negative 70 millivolts. Negative 70 millivolts is the resting membrane potential. When I'm at rest, voltage-gated sodium channels are not open. Voltage-gated potassium channels are not open. We're ready to hear a message. We get that message, that stimulus, which messes with our chemically gated channels. So chemically gated sodium channels open up, and they open up to get me to threshold. Once I get to threshold, let's underline, highlight, star that voltage-gated sodium channels open up. Voltage-gated sodium channels are the types of channels that can depolarize the membrane really quickly. And remember, the goal of depolarizing was to get all the way to positive 30 so I can talk to my neighbor. All this depolarizing phase that we see here, the voltage-gated sodium channels are open. This is part of the absolute refractory period, where I absolutely cannot hear any other messages. The reason I can't is because my voltage-gated sodium channels are open. I stay in the absolute refractory period all the way through this process of repolarizing as well, for most of the repolarizing process. This is because, let's underline, highlight, star, sodium channels are inactivated. My voltage-gated sodium channels are what I need to respond to a message. First, at the beginning of the refractory period, those channels are wide open. They're already open. I can't open them more to hear another message. But the second part of that absolute refractory period comes from the fact that then they're inactivated. They're bent out of shape because it's too positive inside the cell. This repolarizing phase, when I'm going back to normal, remember that I used voltage-gated potassium channels to help me bring that charge back down. So voltage-gated potassium channels are open, bringing my charge back down. But what makes this the absolute refractory period is the fact that the sodium channels are inactivated. They absolutely can't open. By the time we get close to threshold, we enter into the hyperpolarized state, or we enter into the relative refractory period. The relative refractory period is a period of time where if I get a message that's strong enough, I will be able to respond to it. The reason this relative refractory period exists, let's underline, highlight, star, is because my sodium channels are in the resting state. When my sodium channels get back to normal, which again happens a little bit before threshold or right around threshold, they stop being inactivated, they go back to their normal state. Now they could open again. We could start this process over because they're now available to reopen. But here's what makes it hard for us to get a message when we're in this relative refractory period. The sodium channels absolutely are ready. But at the same time that the sodium channels are ready and willing to make our charge go up, the voltage-gated potassium channels are also still open. And when voltage-gated potassium channels are open, my membrane charge is plummeting. It's dropping down. As I'm going down and down and down, if I want to hear another message, I still have to get up to threshold. Threshold is always where I have to get to if I'm going to talk to my neighbor. Well, when I'm actively pumping out potassium, I can't get to threshold very easily. Think about it kind of like if you jump out of an airplane without a parachute. You're skydiving without a parachute. You are dropping straight down. It's going to be really hard for you to go back up without a parachute. That's what's going right here. My membrane charge is skydiving down and down and down and down. If I want to go back up, I'm going to need a really strong message, or I'm going to need a really strong parachute to get me back up. So the refractory period of a neuron, overall, this is the period of time where either a neuron absolutely cannot hear another message, or it's a period of time where if it's a strong message, I might hear it. The absolute refractory period is a problem with my voltage-gated sodium channels. The relative refractory period is a problem with my voltage-gated potassium channels. As you're considering this period, keep in mind which type of channel causes each of these problems and see if you can explain why we have this absolute refractory period and this relative refractory period.